What we actually want is the right outcome for the customer. And the right outcome for the customer sometimes will mean they don't buy. Sometimes it will mean that they do buy, but at least we know we've done the right thing as opposed to selling for selling's sake.
The Question Is, from Thinking Focus.
Today on The Question Is, we're talking about selling and how you talk yourself into a sale.
Hi, this is Ricky from Thinking Focus.
Hi, and this is Rob from Thinking Focus.
The Question Is, from Thinking Focus. A podcast about how we sometimes get in our own way and what we can do about it.
So the question is, Ricky, how do you talk yourself into a sale?
Well, that's an interesting question, Rob, because the reality is most people spend their time talking themselves out of a sale.
Oh, okay.
So in order to understand how you talk yourself into a sale, it might be worth exploring.
You got to get there.
What are we doing that causes us to talk ourselves out of a sale?
So this sounds very much to me like self-talk. This is the battle that we might have going on inside ourselves about, should I be doing this? Should I not be doing that? What happens if this happens? So self-talk.
Absolutely. This is all about what's the stories we're creating in our head, the narrative when we're faced with a new customer, an old customer, maybe a new situation that we've never faced before.
Okay.
And we probably tapping into what other people have said to us, past experiences. All of that is going to shape the way in which we engage in this sales opportunity.
So you mentioned before about we typically would talk ourselves out of a sale.
Yes.
So and it might be helpful to look at it that way. So what's going on there then? How do we typically talk ourselves out of doing stuff?
Well, I've spent quite a lot of time in sales. In fact, the bulk of my career has been in sales. And I know from personal experience that when you're not sure, you start to second guess how the customer's going to react.
Right.
And depending on how confident you are about what you're selling, that might inform how you approach any call that you make in terms of booking an appointment or indeed the conversation that you have.
Okay.
So you're kind of second guessing how the customer's going to react. What are they going to say to this? Why do they want what we're selling? These sort of questions are going to be going through your head.
And why should they have it?
And why should they have it?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And why from me?
Right. So, I mean, I've been involved in sales as well. And just thinking back, it must be very easy for a salesperson to really only be one-dimensional in the thinking. I've got a sale to make, so I'm going to go make that sale, rather than, because you'd be mentioning the customer. You know, rather than me thinking about the customer and whether the customer is going to benefit from what we're trying to sell. That's a bit of an issue as well, I would guess.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So am I good enough? Mm-hmm. Is our product good enough? Because we always compare with what other people are selling, and we live in a competitive world. So, you know, there could be situations where other people's product or service is better than what we're offering.
Right.
Their brand positioning. I spent years in financial services where there was a well-known high street brand that took 1 in 4 of the sales opportunities in the market. They took them straight away. So everybody else is fighting out for the other 3.
Okay.
And all of a sudden you're going, well, we're second best, at best, or worse. So therefore, am I conditioning my thinking to be in we'll play for scraps? And that's not necessarily a healthy position.
No.
If we're looking through the customer's lens and what we can bring, then actually it's a whole different ballgame, and we can focus on what we can do for the customer, building that great relationship, understanding them, what they need, and then positioning our product and solution for them.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a huge risk associated with all of this interaction and the potential interaction we want to have with a customer, the risk being assumptions that we make. So, you know, I mean, that must be prevalent, and it must be really difficult to either be aware of those assumptions in the first place and then deal with them. So how does that work? Yeah,
well, we bring assumptions, beliefs, past experiences. All of those things are going to shape how we think about the sale, how we think about the customer. And of course, we also have pressure typically from our sales managers, from our targets. Right. All of this is creating an ecosystem about how we think about, and depending on how confident we are and how helpful our talk is to ourselves in terms of how we will go into a sale. So if we're making assumptions that our competitors are better than we are, that I don't understand this product fully, that the customer doesn't want what we're selling, then how I act in the sale or in the sales process is going to condition how I behave, and therefore the customer's going to pick up on that. And therefore I'm more likely to talk myself out of the sale and lose the sale.
Okay.
As opposed to focusing on all the great things that we do, the great experiences I've had in the past, because it's easy to remember the things we've not done so well, but we're not always great at remembering the things where we have done particularly well.
And playing it back to ourselves.
And playing that narrative through that says, sales is a losing game. You don't win every sale.
Right.
So how do we focus on the ones that we do win and learn from what we do, not just in what we do, but the way we think going into that sale?
Okay.
Because if we think about the narrative that played through our minds when we did well, and use that as almost a playback going into every sale, whether it's in preparing for a call, whether it's in preparing for the actual sales meeting, whether it's in sales follow-up, if we play through that kind of tape, that recording, that MP3 as it probably would be today, but we play that through our mind before we go into that, using the helpful experiences that we've had, not those unhelpful experiences that we've had. Well,
that sounds like a very logical approach. How come people find that a difficult thing to do then? Because if we're falling foul of talking ourselves out of a sale or making some assumptions, then your description about we can play that video of our previous successes through our minds and remind ourselves of what we did well before. In my experience, I don't think many people are good at doing that. They seem to forget that they should be doing that or could be doing that.
They don't. And because we get caught up in the moment, and we get caught up in the pressure of the situation of having to make the sale, having to win this new customer. Quite often we've got the backdrop of, as we said before, of targets and a need to deliver, and that's playing out in our minds. So we've got this mixed messaging going on through our mind, as opposed to if we focus on what we want, which what we actually want is the right outcome for the customer. And the right outcome for the customer sometimes will mean they don't buy, sometimes it will mean that they do buy, but at least we know we've done the right thing, as opposed to selling for selling's sake. Because repeat custom, building relationships, long-term, and sales generally is a long-term relationship. I know for some transactional sales that might not be true, but even if you're building a relationship in the moment, that's really important. And that's built on having a healthy narrative and doing the right thing in the sale. But for me, play through the narrative of the successes you've had. Don't go looking for those less successful outcomes that you've had in the past. So what's interesting there is that I think that there's a natural tendency for people to not be able to remember clearly. So do you get what I mean by that? So there's this there's almost like a mental blockage, a thing that you can't get past, to dig for those things, the times that you were successful, and to play that back with some clarity. So how can we help people with that? How can we help people to clear out some of the very unhelpful thinking that's going on, which is more likely to surface before the helpful stuff? Well, I think there are one in particular. One great thing that we could do is actually reflect on that sales meeting, and if you can do that with a colleague or with your sales manager, who will ask you some questions, and what they're looking for is learning, and what they're looking for is the wins that you've had in that. So there's no failure in this. There is, I either learn or I celebrate some successes. So what were the things that we did well? And causing you to replay that will help you to create a narrative. And what they can do is help check when we start to get on that negative or that unhelpful trail, and start to bring you back into focus and actually go, you know what? Actually, that was a real positive because. And therefore build a success bank that we can draw upon, as opposed to well, you didn't say that very well, and you didn't talk to them in that way very well, and you didn't share the product benefits and value proposition that could bring. You focused on where you were at and you focused on all that unhelpful thinking that actually conditioned the way you went into the sale in the first place.
Okay.
So if we go in with a helpful mindset, we are more likely to come out with a helpful outcome.
Of course, yeah.
And one that is more likely to be, A, most importantly, right for the customer, and hopefully, B, you win the business that you've gone in to win.
Sure, okay. So that's a really helpful strategy, getting other people involved and bouncing off other people. So, a sales team is probably an effective and healthy environment to be in if you're using it effectively, because some people will be in a sales team and still act in a very insular way. But that's a really helpful strategy, because if I'm individually finding it difficult to surface some of the more helpful things that I've done before, other people around me who I work with, have worked with for a while, might be able to actually remind me of that better than I can myself.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing to remember is there'll be people listening that kind of go, but that's not the environment I operate in.
Okay.
The only questions I get is, have we won the business? Have we won the business?
Yeah.
When are they going to close?
That Monday morning call.
That Monday
What's your
morning
number?
call. Yeah, what's the number? Where are we at?
Yeah.
So you'll get... In sales management terms, you'll get what you ask for, and the guys will only focus on the number, whereas actually the value is searching through the quality of call that they've had during the week before,
Right.
Or meetings that they've had,
Right.
and dissecting those. But also, they might be in a situation where they're remote, so they might not have access to others to
Yes.
take them through that, and it might not be seen as the best use of time, in which case what I would get them to do essentially is write down the call and look for the helpful things and be truly honest when they're reflecting. So essentially they're doing what the sales manager will do, but they're writing it down and go looking for the helpful things.
Yeah.
And if there's some unhelpful stuff in there, then let's think about that in terms of how might I do differently next time? What could I do differently next time?
Right.
Because that will open up a whole different way of looking for that self-improvement stuff that's within there. So writing down what actually happened, and of course there'll be some incongruence in there, as you said, because we fill in the gaps with the narrative that kind of makes sense of what's just happened, where actually that might not be true.
Including a justification for when it went wrong.
Including
Right.
justification. But
Because you
Graham,
turn around and go, oh, well, it wasn't anything I did. Obviously my product's not very good, or the customer didn't want it, or the timing's wrong, or all sorts of different justifications that we've all heard before. But part of that analysis, that dissecting, is to actually be very self-aware, isn't it? And examining your own mindset, your own attitude, the self-talk that you've used, and to look for any gaps and any learning that you can take from all of that.
You're only ever going to improve if you can reflect and learn from what you do. Whether you do some things brilliantly or whether you do things that are perhaps not where you wanted them to be. But fundamentally, and if you can't reflect, and if you can't, get somebody to help you with that reflection, where they'll ask you those searching questions, but treat that, what we would describe as a growth mindset that goes, what can I learn from this?
Yes.
Without justifying, without being, well, yes, but the customer wasn't really interested. They weren't well qualified. This lead didn't really want to see me. And the competition have a much better product, so we're always going to lose that. If that were true, there'd only be one provider in every sector.
Right.
And fundamentally, people buy people. Therefore, if you can build strong relationships, strong connections with your customers, and truly understand what they want, then you'll talk yourself into more sales, then you will talk yourself out of more sales.
Excellent. Which seems like a really good place to finish. So talking yourself into a sale, some useful strategies there to think through.
Brilliant.
Okay. Thanks,
Rob.
Ricky.
Next time on The Question Is...
It became obvious that the only thing they were concerned about wasn't the end product that the customer got. It was actually just getting the money from the customer. And once they'd got the money from the customer, they didn't really care about the quality of service that people received.
Thinking Focus works with teams and business units in organizations around the world, helping them achieve breakthroughs by enabling them to think differently. To find out more about our work and how we could help your organization, go to www.thinkingfocus.com.